What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. We continue with our 2025 college football schedule preview and very early projected record series. The Auburn Tigers are up next. Before we look ahead to 2025, let's take a look back at what Auburn did in 2024. Here are my projections and predictions last year for Auburn. My projection for this team was 8-4, and then my prediction for them was 7-5. But of course, Auburn did not expect those expectations or exceed those expectations like I thought they would. This was second-year head coach Hugh Freeze's second year at Auburn, and they went 5-7, so a disappointing year for Auburn last year in 2024. But the reason why they went 5-7 is because they lost a lot of close games, and in my opinion, I think Auburn was the best SEC 5-7 team to go without going to a bowl game last year. They were definitely the best 5-7 team in the country. So yeah, Auburn coming off a disappointing year, and this was the schedule from them in 2024. It was a tough schedule, especially in the SEC. First off, though, in the non-conference, they played Alabama A&M, California out of the ACC. Then they played New Mexico, and then also ULM Monroe. So not a tough non-conference schedule, but they did lose to Cal there on September the 7th. That was a close game. So yeah, very unfortunate for Auburn to lose in Jordan-Hare. Yeah, that's just not going to get it done there if you're Hugh Freeze in this Auburn program. So yeah, they lost their non-conference game to Cal, but then you take a look at their SEC schedule. First off, you look at who they played at home last year. They played Arkansas, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, and Texas A&M. And you look at those SEC games, they lost to Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Vanderbilt. So they lost 3 out of their 4 games at home last year at Jordan-Hare, one of the toughest places to play in the SEC. Yeah, that's kind of disappointing if you're an Auburn fan, but they beat Texas A&M in 4 overtimes, and really, that was the only night game they hosted at Jordan-Hare in the SEC. Maybe that's the reason why they won that game. So, yeah, pretty tough, home schedule last year, but, some of those home games were definitely close games for Auburn that they could have won. And then you take a look at the away schedule. They played at Georgia, at Missouri, at Kentucky, and then also at Alabama. So they had a very tough road schedule. Of course, Georgia ended up not being a close game. Missouri was a pretty close game. Kentucky, they beat them on the road. And then obviously Alabama, that was a tough one there at Bryant-Denny Stadium. Yeah, last year's game was not really close between these two teams. So that's a schedule from last year. What does it look like for 2025? Well, this is that schedule for Auburn. Before we go game by game, let's take a look at who their non-conference opponents will be in 2025. So this is their non-conference schedule. They will play, of course, on the road at Baylor. They will play them to open things up on Friday night. So yeah, they'll play the Bears there out of the Big 12. Very interesting non-conference game there. And then the rest of the non-conference games for Auburn are pretty much cupcakes. They got Ball State, South Alabama, and then Mercer. So non-conference schedule pretty similar to last year where they play 3 cupcakes and then they got that one big Power 4 game. And this time it's Baylor out of the Big 12. And again, that game will be on Friday, of course. So that's your non-conference schedule. Not a tough non-conference schedule at all for the Tigers. Let's now take a look at their home games in the SEC. And the home and away is flipped here in the SEC. For all the teams that they played on the road last year, they will play them at home. And then the teams that they played at home last year, they will play those teams on the road. So this year at home, they will play Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky, and then Alabama. So this is a pretty tough home schedule here for Auburn. Kentucky definitely is a winnable game. That looks like a pretty even matchup in my opinion. And Missouri, that's like a big revenge game there. They lost to Missouri last year in a close game. Obviously, they weren't really that competitive against Georgia, but Alabama, they were also not competitive. They had to play Alabama and Georgia both on the road. This year, they play them at home. So those, in my opinion, are the 2 biggest games here for Auburn at home. And then again, on the other side, Missouri and Kentucky are very winnable games. They'll have a chance against Georgia and Alabama, but the question is, are they going to have a big chance? Well, I think they do, but yeah, I think they'll be underdogs in both of those games, which I'll get to here in just a moment. But that's your home schedule. Let's now take a look at their road games in the SEC. They will play on the road at Oklahoma, at Texas A&M, at Arkansas, and then on the road at Vanderbilt. So it's not a bad road schedule here for Auburn. Oklahoma and Texas A&M will be 2 very tough road games. Arkansas, of course, will be a little bit tricky as well, but I think that's a pretty winnable game there for Auburn. And then same thing with Vanderbilt. They lost to Vanderbilt last year by 10. And again, for these opponents that they played last year, They beat Texas A&M, but they lost 3 out of these 4 opponents in close games. They lost to Oklahoma last year, by 6 points, I believe. They lost to Arkansas, I believe, by 10, and then same thing with Vanderbilt as well. So, yeah, these are like big revenge games here for Auburn because, I mean, I know they're on the road, but they are like big revenge games. And then, obviously, it's going to be a revenge game here for Texas A&M because they lost to Auburn last year in 4 overtimes. So, that's your away schedule. Let's go back to the schedule now and go full game by game now for Auburn. Again, they will open things up with Baylor on a Friday, August 29th on the road. Then they play Ball State on September 6th. Then South Alabama on September 13th. So they play 3 out of their 4 non-conference games to kick off the first 3 weeks. So there's a pretty good chance that Auburn can get off to an undefeated 3-0 start. But if they get off to a 2-1 start, it's because they probably lost to Baylor. But yeah, that's your first 3 games. And then they jump right into SEC play. They'll play on the road at Oklahoma on September 20th. And then they'll also play on the road at Texas A&M on September 27th. So a couple of back-to-back road games there in the month of September with Oklahoma and Texas A&M. Yeah, that's kind of tough there for Auburn. And then after that, they get their first bye week. I think this is a pretty good spot for a bye week. You get time to recover after those back-to-back road game trips, and then you get ready for that big game against Georgia at home on October the 11th. Then they got Missouri also at home on October 18th, so back-to-back home games there against Georgia and Missouri in the month of October. After that, it's Arkansas on the road on October 25th. Back home for Kentucky on November 1st, then back on the road to play Vanderbilt on November 8th. And the second bye week comes right before playing Mercer. That's not a really good spot for a bye week if you're an Auburn fan. To me, you like to have that bye week either against, before playing Vanderbilt or probably against Alabama in the Iron Bowl. But they will close things out in the Iron Bowl against Alabama on November 29th. So the schedule, once again, is pretty tough here for Auburn. Again, you got Baylor in the non-conference, and then you got back-to-back road games there with Oklahoma and Texas A&M. But you get Georgia and Alabama, your 2 biggest home games against your 2 biggest rivals. You get 2 of those games at home, and they're both in the month of October and the month of November. One's in the month of October, and then one's in the month of November. And one thing I'm really seeing here is that there is no LSU on the schedule for Auburn, which doesn't make sense to me. But let's get in now to the projection here for Auburn based on how tough this schedule is. This is the scale I'll be using here for their official projection. If it's basically a 1% game in the red, that's pretty much going to be counted as an automatic loss. 20% in the orange, that's where Auburn will be about a double-digit underdog. 40% in the yellow, that's where Auburn's going to be about a clear underdog again, so 6 or 7 point underdogs, so by less than a touchdown. And then your 50-50 games, those will stay in the white, games that really could go either way. And then your 60% games in the purple, that's where Auburn will be favored by less than a touchdown, so 6 or 7 points. And then 80% in the blue, that's where they'll be favored by double digits. And then your green games are pretty much your guaranteed and also your automatic wins. So we'll start with those green games here for Auburn, the easy wins. I think you got 3 of those: Ball State, South Alabama, and Mercer. So 3 out of your 4 non-conference games, I think Auburn will be favored in all 3 of these games. They absolutely should be able to take care of business in all 3 of them. Although Ball State is a decent team out of the MAC, I wouldn't really say they're one of the best teams in that conference, but maybe they can give Auburn a little bit of trouble, but I just don't see the Tigers losing this game. And look, I know a couple years ago, Auburn did lose to New Mexico State, but that was a different time. This is like 2025. Auburn definitely should be able to win all 3 of their non-conference games here. Maybe they could also beat Baylor, but they definitely should be able to take care of business in these cupcakes here. So yeah, Auburn definitely will be big favorites in all 3 of these. I think these 3 games, they will be favored by 17 to 20 plus points, and they'll probably be over that 95 to 99% range as well. So those are your 3 wins here for Auburn on this projection. But really, when you look at the schedule, the rest of the schedule, I should say, there's not really any other games on here where you can favor the Tigers by double digits, and then also in the purple at 6 or 7 points. But a few of their games are almost pretty even matchups, but then you got a few games where they're going to be underdogs. And I do got one game here in the orange where I think Auburn's going to be about a double-digit underdog. That's going to be Georgia here on October the 11th. And look, I know this is a home game. It does give Auburn a pretty good chance here to pull off the upset. They could probably be a 6 or 7 point underdog. But based off of how last year's game went and based off of how the teams finished, that's the reason why it does turn out to be an orange game instead of like the yellow. So yeah, I think Auburn's going to be about a double-digit underdog, so about 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that particular point range. So I got Auburn as a double-digit underdog here against Georgia. And then I got a couple games where I think they're going to be clear underdogs, and that's Texas A&M and Alabama. I think Auburn's going to be about a 6 or 7 point underdog in both of these games. You know, Texas A&M, I know they beat them last year. It should be a 50-50 game, but because it's on the road and based off of how these two teams finished, Texas A&M looks like a clearly better team as of right now. So I got to put the Aggies here in the yellow. And then Alabama, that's also a rivalry game. Anything can happen here in the Iron Bowl. And, you know, we've seen Alabama struggle against Auburn at Jordan-Hare. But as of right now, based off of how last year's game went and not being close, that's the reason why I think Auburn will be about a 6 or 7 point underdog. I think Auburn's got much of a better chance against Alabama than Georgia, perhaps. You know, Georgia really hasn't struggled at Jordan-Hare over the course of the years. They did it a couple years ago, where Georgia only won by 7 points, but, you know, Auburn, I think they can really give Alabama some problems, and we already saw with Kalen DeBoer's first year as the Alabama coach. He has struggled on the road already, so this will be a tough game here for the Crimson Tide, but it's absolutely a game that Auburn can pull off an upset in, upset I should say in, and they had a chance a couple of years ago in Nick Saban's final year. That game, of course, came down to the wire. It could come down to the wire again in 2025, and then that's going to leave you at 6 total 50-50 games. You got Baylor, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt. These 6 games right here can really go either way. You know, as of right now, I probably favor Baylor by at least, less than a field goal. Oklahoma probably, close to a field goal as well. Missouri, maybe Auburn is probably favored because they're playing at home, and same thing with Kentucky. And then Arkansas might be favored against Auburn by a field goal, but maybe Vanderbilt's probably the underdog, and Auburn's probably favored because they are just a much more better team. But that game is on the road, so that'll be a tricky one here for Auburn. They lost to Vanderbilt last year. Could they probably lose them for the second year in a row? So yeah, 6 total 50-50 games that really can go either way here for Auburn. Let's now get a projected record based on how tough this schedule is for Auburn. So we count the green games as wins, and then you average out the 2 yellow games at 40%. You count the Georgia game in the 20% range as a slight loss. And then you count these 50-50 games, you average them all out at 50%, these 6 50-50 games, and I think Auburn's going to split them. They have to win at least 3 out of the 6 games here to probably make it to a bowl game, because you got your 3 wins in the green. That's going to give you a total of 6 wins, and that is what the projection actually comes out to be. It is 6-6 here for Auburn, so the projection is telling me that Auburn can make it to a bowl game just barely. Again, this is not a tough schedule. It's not quite as worse as it was last year. Again, you get Georgia and Alabama both at home. Those are your 2 biggest home games, and then you'll have definitely a decent chance to pull off an upset against either Texas A&M or Alabama. But like I said, with those 3 green wins, they can probably win at least 3 out of these 6 50-50 games. They're going to have to win at least 3 of them in order to make it to a bowl game at best. So yeah, 6-6 is what the projection is for Auburn as of right now, and I think best case scenario is probably like 7-5. But if this team goes 5-7 again, or maybe even worse at like 4-8, then Hugh Freeze might not be the right guy here for this Auburn football program. But we'll see what happens. We'll see if Auburn can finally have a really good season under Hugh Freeze. First year he was 6-7, last year 5-7. It's not been a good start, but we'll see if Auburn can turn things around in 2025. But as of right now, the projection is 6-6 here for Auburn. Give me your guys' thoughts on Auburn down in the comments below, and do you agree or disagree with their projection? Let me know as well. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.